Let's begin learning regular verbs in bulk. We've learned all the verbs in the irregular neighborhood near Joel's house, and we've been introduced to one regular verb in the woods, hablar, and one regular verb on the beach, beber. In this lesson, we're going to learn about 45 new verbs, but we don't have to learn all of their conjugations. That's because the verbs along the beach are conjugated like beber, and the verbs along the woods are conjugated like hablar. So for the most part, we're only learning the infinitive of each verb, along with how it's used. In the next couple of videos, we'll go over the verbs in the woods, and then we'll go over to the beach. Although the woods and the beach are very different, these two separate verb paths follow some similar trends. In each case, there's more business and urban development to the south, nearer to Joel's house, but as we proceed north, things get more quiet. Starting from hablar and beber, we're going to follow both paths northward and see how they're similar. Now, as we go forward, take careful note of not only how the verbs are laid out in each neighborhood, but how the neighborhoods are organized one after the other. A quick note about Joel's world. After all of this time that we've spent in Joel, you may have a burning question. Where do most of the people actually live? Joel has an enormous house at the south end of our map, but the rest of the people must live somewhere. Well, most of them live in apartment buildings on top of some of the shops. The hablar shop, for example, has several floors of flats above it. The woods around hablar are prime real estate. Many people go by here, and it's a thriving community. There are tall buildings and public transportation to handle the masses. There are a few distinct neighborhoods at the south end of the woods here, each with a distinguishing appearance. In hablar's neighborhood in particular, which is the first one we encounter, all of the shops have fancy awnings over their windows, which look suspiciously like the top of the carousel from the amusement park. Next door to hablar is Joel's own office, which is called Trabajar. Joel claims that he's a very hard worker. And what he means by that is that he goes to his office about once a week, and as soon as he thinks about working, he says, "That's too hard," and leaves. Trabajar, with a stress on jar, like hard, is the word for to work. This office is connected with another one called dejar. Dejar is a pawn shop that Joel owns. If you want to borrow even a small amount of money from dejar, you have to leave your most prized possession as collateral. Many people find this very hard to do, but there are enough poor people in Joel's neighborhood that his business manages to swindle them out of some fantastic possessions. The word dejar, also with a stress on jar, like hard, means to leave or to leave behind. So remember that Joel's two spots here are trabajar and dejar. Now you might say that a lot of things in this neighborhood are hard, even just walking down the street. So often you'll find that Joel is sleeping outside of his office on the street, making it hard to walk past. And then right outside of dejar, next door, there's a broken down pawned car. At the next place next door, a bunch of buckets of tar are blocking the road. These buckets of tar belong to the last place in this neighborhood, which is the local manners school. This place is called tratar. The motto of this store is, "Try to treat everyone nicely." Students are given a bucket of tar to balance on their heads, and if they mess up and spill tar on anyone, they're expelled. The word tratar means either to try or to treat, depending on the context. Keep in mind the phrase, "try to treat everyone nicely," for tratar. All four of these verbs, hablar, trabajar, dejar, and tratar, are most commonly followed by the word de. This is represented by the colorful carousel-like awnings. Imagine that Joel flies out from under them, shouting, "Day!" just like at the carousel in the amusement park. Before we go to the next neighborhood, let's look at all the common uses of hablar, trabajar, dejar, and tratar. In each case, try to become really familiar with the idioms, and I recommend that you even write your own variations on the sentences I'm about to present. This is how you actually become comfortable truly using these verbs like a native speaker, which is what you're going to have to do if you use them in a conversation. Again, the verbs in hablar's neighborhood are all often followed by de. But actually, the de is used in different ways for each of these 4 different verbs. There's no single sentence structure that applies to all of them equally, so let's talk about each one separately. In the case of hablar, of course, we've already seen that the de is usually followed by a noun, which is whatever you're talking about. For example, we're talking about my story would be hablamos de mi historia. Next door, trabajar is also usually followed by de and then a noun. But in this case, the noun will typically be what you are in your work, such as a police officer. To ask, do you work as a police officer? You would say, ¿trabajas de policía? She was working as a doctor would be, trabajaba de doctora. Next door, dejar can mean a couple of things. First of all, when it's followed by de, it actually means to stop doing something. So the de will be followed by an infinitive. For example, stop doing that would be deja de hacer eso. But sometimes dejar means let. In these cases, it typically gets a direct object before it and then a verb infinitive after it. For example, to say, they're letting you do this, you would say, te dejan hacer esto. So remember those 2 meanings for dejar. Dejar de hacer eso means stop doing that. But te dejan hacer esto is they're letting you do this. Tratar also has multiple meanings, as we indicated by using the institution's motto, try to treat everyone nicely. So tratar can mean either to try or to treat. Tratar means to treat when it's used in the simplest way possible with just a direct object. For example, do they treat him well? That would be lo tratan bien. That's a pretty simple sentence structure. But when we follow tratar by de, and then we use a verb, it means to try doing something. For example, if I were to order you, try to do it quickly, that would be trata de hacerlo rápido. Tratar can also be a reflexive verb, which means something complicated. It refers to what something is about. For example, to say, the story is about a little girl, we would say, la historia se trata de una niña. The story is about a large family would be, la historia se trata de una gran familia. So that's pretty much all we have to learn about these 4 verbs in hablar's neighborhood. Let's review them very quickly. He talks about that. That would be habla de eso. She works as a doctor. Trabaja de doctora. He stops doing it. Deja de hacerlo. She's letting me do that. Me deja hacer eso. He treats her well. La trata bien. She tries to do it. Trata de hacerlo. It's about this. Se trata de esto. Again, I recommend writing your own variations on these sentences. If you think you're ready, let's move on to the next neighborhood. This one has public transport available. Small carousel-like horses move along, allowing people to get a break from walking. But this is a very small neighborhood, so these horses don't really go very far. In fact, right now there are only 2 businesses open in this neighborhood. Entrar on the left and Pensar on the right. Entrar is a secret society of reptiles. You have to say a password in order to get in, and only reptiles know the password. Joel sees the lizard going in all the time, but Joel himself has never been able to guess the password. The word entrar, with a stress on rar, which is the password, means to enter. Meanwhile, Pensar is a shop run by the Tsar. Now, the Tsar doesn't really have any political power in Joel. He did once, but he never really got anything done because he's as lazy as Joel. Now he runs a few shops in Joel where he's just as productive as he was when he was in power. At Pensar, he tries to sell pens. The Tsar insists that if you have a pen, everyone will think that you're smart, or at least that you're thinking. His marketing method is to sit on the street in front of his shop holding the pens out and telling the passers-by, "Buy a pen, people will think that you're thinking." This isn't very effective in anything except marking all of the carousel horses that go by with pen ink. This word, pensar, means to think. Now note that both pensar and entrar are commonly followed by en. This is represented by these carousel horses. So for example, to enter a house would be entrar en una casa. To think about a house would be pensar en una casa. Spanish speakers don't think about things as often as they think on things, or pensar en las cosas. Let's practice a little bit more using the infinitives of entrar and pensar, followed by en. They can't think about that. No pueden pensar en eso. I can't think about anything else. No puedo pensar en nada más. Can't you enter the house? No puedes entrar en la casa. Now, why is entrar on the left, but pensar on the right? In the previous neighborhood, all of the shops were on the left side of the road. Well, I kind of lied to you earlier. I've called all of the verbs that we learned this week regular verbs. And that's mostly true. The verbs on the left side are all regular. They're conjugated exactly like hablar in the case of the woods, or te ver in the case of the beach, with some extremely slight variations. However, any verbs that occur on the right side of a street, such as pensar here, have some categorical exceptions. So you would think that the present tense of pensar would be pienso, piensa, and so on. But since it's on the right side of the street, it's actually pienso, piensa, and so on. Basically, an extra I vowel has been added to the stressed syllable of some of the conjugations. This is because Spanish speakers don't like stressing e all by itself in a verb, like penso. They prefer the sound of a stressed ie, like pienso. Now, these exceptions only apply to the present tense and the subjunctive tense. Any other conjugation of this mostly regular verb will be normal. Just for practice, here are all of the present and subjunctive conjugations of pensar. Any time that en would be stressed, it's en. So, I think is pienso. He or she is thinking would be piensa. You're thinking would be piensas. They think is piensan. And then we think is normal. It's just pensamos because the stress is on the a vowel. Pensamos. The subjunctives are piense, pienses, piensen, and pensemos. Let's go ahead and practice some of these conjugations in a new sentence context. Pensar is normally followed by en to indicate what someone is thinking about or on, but other times pensar is used right before another verb. In these cases, it means that someone is thinking about doing something or considering doing something. For example, they're thinking about doing it would simply be piensan hacerlo. Let's move on. If you go through this carousel horse neighborhood and don't jump off your horse, you'll end up being dumped onto a watery slide that takes you through the next neighborhood. In this neighborhood, rather than en, verbs tend to be followed by a, which we encountered in the amusement park at the water slide. The first shop that we encounter is a shop run by Dar, whom we met in the irregular verb neighborhood earlier. Here, she has a so-called life-saving shop, where she tries to sell life jackets and life preservers to people who are going past on the slides. She mostly tries to sell these to the birds who go by, but they normally ignore her because the birds who slide past here can normally float just fine. Dar usually shouts at them, "I'm just trying to help you." The word ayudar means to help. The next shop down is Llamar, spelled L-L-A-M-A-R. This is a sign shop run by a llama named Mar. Any new business has to buy a fin-shaped sign from Mar. However, Mar is a bit of a bully. His rage and strength have victimized many Yol residents who have crossed him. He tries to stay professional in his sign store, but he gets very angry easily. For example, if a customer calls him a llama, pronounced the English way, rather than a llama, which is how you'd pronounce it in Spanish, he pours out his rage on the sign that he's selling them, marring the sign beyond recognition. The word llamar means to call. This is the word that you use when you're referring to what something is called. For example, if you're talking about what a store is called, you would refer to its infinitive, and the verb you'd use to call it that would be llamar. The slides that we go down in this neighborhood end at two shops. Llegar is on the left, like the two shops we just visited, and jugar is on the right. Whoever slides into llegar is greeted loudly with a shout, "She got here!" The owner of Llegar is an old granny who loves giving out prizes to little girls, especially little girls who are brave enough to slide past all of the shops in this neighborhood. But this granny is blind, so she doesn't realize that half of the people who slide in are guys, not girls. She still says, "She got here." The word llegar, which sounds like the way that this granny says "she got here," llegar, means to arrive. On the right side, at jugar, we find another old woman. She wants young boys to come and play because she has a bunch of games and toys, but they're all designed for little boys. For example, she likes playing a blindfold game, and normally she's still wearing the blindfold every time a guest arrives. So every time someone comes, in order to find out if it's a boy who wants to play a game, she always says, "Who got here?" Or, as she pronounces it, jugar. The word jugar means to play. Now, why is jugar on the right side rather than the left side? I mentioned that Spanish speakers don't like the stressed e sound all by itself in a verb. It gets replaced by ie in pensar and some other verbs that we'll learn later. Spanish speakers also don't like the stressed u sound all by itself in a verb. They tend to replace it with a stressed ue. So the present and subjunctive conjugations of jugar sound like this. I play is juego. He or she plays is juega. You play is juegas. They play is juegan. And then we play is as expected, jugamos. The subjunctives are juegue, juegues, jueguen, and juguemos. Let's practice conjugations of jugar and other verbs in this neighborhood. The verbs on this downhill water slide slope are commonly followed by the preposition a. Llegar is followed by a because for Joel, people don't arrive at a place as they do in English. Instead, they arrive to a place. For example, arriving at the house would be llegar a la casa. Meanwhile, jugar is followed by a when we talk about what game we're playing. For example, to play football would be jugar a football. She arrives in the country is llega al país. He's playing those games would be juega a esos juegos. As far as llamar goes, it probably seems natural that you would call to someone or llamar a alguien. But it's used in other ways as well. The idiom llamar a la puerta, literally call to the door, is the idiom that's used to mean knocking or knocking at a door. So to say afterwards they knocked at the door, that would be después llamaron a la puerta. Here's a handy idiom using llamar. If you're meeting someone, it's normally polite to ask what they call themselves, so to speak, rather than what their name is. For example, what's your name could actually be phrased as, how do you call yourself? Or, in the formal voice, ¿Cómo se llama usted? She was called Luna would be se llamaba Luna. Meanwhile, ayudar uses the preposition a if you're helping someone to do something. For example, although he helps her is simply la ayuda, he helps her do it is la ayuda a hacerlo. As you can see, the a there is used right after ayudar and right before the other verb. Here are some more examples. They helped me play. Me ayudaron a jugar. He helps her get into her house. This would actually be translated as he helps her enter her house. La ayuda a entrar en su casa. Let's look at another idiom that uses llegar. The word por, when combined with some verbs, means that something is yet to happen, or in the future. For example, está por llegar means that it's yet to arrive. You can actually do this with venir as well, which is an irregular verb, and that would mean it's yet to come. So, for example, the best is yet to come could either be lo mejor está por venir or lo mejor está por llegar. Let's continue past these slides where the ground becomes more level. The last neighborhood in this noisy urban area has only one business, and it's Contar on the right side of the street. This is a business that offers to pave people's driveways with tar in creative ways. Their motto is, "Make your driveway count." They pave driveways with very high-quality tar, and they claim that they can use the tar to help your driveway tell a story. They think that that makes them sound very important, although in reality their version of a story usually just looks like an elaboration on a hopscotch design. The word contar has several meanings. The simplest meaning is to count, but it can also mean to tell in the sense of telling a story. Think about a driveway with hopscotch to remember this double meaning. Contar can mean to count or to tell a story. Contar is on the right side because Spanish speakers don't like the stressed o sound all by itself in a verb. They tend to replace it by a stressed ue, just like in jugar. So the present and subjunctive versions of contar end up sounding a lot like jugar. I count is cuento. He or she counts is cuenta. And then we have cuentas, cuentan, and contamos, which is normal. The subjunctives are cuente, cuentes, cuenten, and contemos. Again, the verb contar is the only verb in its neighborhood, but it keeps itself company pretty well because contar can mean many different things. First of all, it can simply mean count, as in counting with numbers. For example, the child knows how to count from 1 to 100. This would be translated as El niño sabe contar del 1 al ciento. It can also mean to count in the sense of being relevant. For example, that doesn't count. That's an English idiom that actually translates into Spanish. To say, that doesn't count, we would say, eso no cuenta. In English, we also use the verb count idiomatically to mean rely, as in, you can count on me. This happens in Spanish, too, but instead of count on, the idiom is count with. For example, you can count on him. That would be, puedes contar con él. There's one more common use of contar, and it's probably the most common use. Remember that the tar sold in contar is used to make a driveway tell a story, as they say. Well, that's because contar can mean tell a story. This is how you're going to hear contar used all the time. So usually decir is used to tell quotes and short facts, but contar is used for telling entire stories. The verb to tell in English can be translated as decir or contar, depending on the context. He told me his story is likely to be translated as me contó su historia. She was telling us the story of her life would be nos contaba la historia de su vida. Before moving on, make sure you can recall the names and positions of all the shops we learned in this video. Walk through these 4 neighborhoods in the woods in your imagination, one after the other. What shops are on the left and what shops are on the right? Then draw out a map of all of these shops to review. Once you're completely comfortable with them, you'll be ready to move on to the rest of our AR verbs.